For 20 years, she believed she was married to a man of God, a preacher, a leader, the kind of husband every woman in her small Alabama town envied. But on one humid summer night, a single mistake revealed the secret he had hidden all his life. By morning, the man of God was dead, and his wife was in handcuffs. What she discovered that night was something no woman could prepare for. The secret inside their marriage bed would leave even detectives speechless. Welcome to Silent Witness, True Crime Stories. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe and also download your free ebook by clicking the link in the pinned comment. How would a wife not know the truth for 20 years? What was he hiding behind closed doors? And what could push a pastor's wife, known for her kindness and devotion, to murder? In this story, faith, deception, and shame collide in one of Alabama's most shocking true crime cases. By the end of this story, you'll be asking yourself what you would do if the person sleeping next to you every night had been living a lie so profound it questioned everything you believed about your own life. Greenville, Alabama. Population barely over 7,000. The kind of place where everyone knows your name, where church on Sunday isn't optional, and where gossip travels faster than the summer heat. In a town like this, reputation is everything. And no one had a better reputation than Pastor David Miller. Tall, soft-spoken, with a gentle smile that could calm even the most troubled soul, David was the senior pastor at Grace Community Church. He'd graduated from a small Bible college in Mississippi, came to Greenville in his late 20s, and within a few years had transformed the struggling congregation into one of the most active churches in the county. David wasn't flashy. He didn't preach fire and brimstone. Instead, his sermons were quiet, thoughtful, filled with stories about grace, redemption, and second chances. People loved him. Families would drive from neighboring towns just to hear him speak. To the people of Greenville, David Miller wasn't just a pastor. He was a living example of what it meant to walk with God. And by his side, every step of the way, was his wife, Rebecca. Rebecca Miller was 38 years old when this story took place. She had soft brown hair she usually wore tied back, kind eyes, and a voice that could fill the church with warmth every Sunday morning as she led the choir. Rebecca had grown up in Greenville, the daughter of a factory worker and a schoolteacher. She'd met David at a church revival when she was 18. He was 22, fresh out of Bible college, earnest and passionate about his calling. They dated for 2 years, got married in a small ceremony, and built a life together that seemed, from the outside, like a model of Christian devotion. Rebecca was known as the rock behind the pastor. She organized charity drives, baked cookies for every church event, visited new mothers with casseroles, and never missed a Sunday service. In a town where everyone had an opinion, Rebecca Miller was universally loved. And her marriage to David? People held it up as the standard. They'd been together for 20 years. They seemed, in every way, like the perfect couple. But behind the closed doors of their modest 2-story home on Magnolia Street, things were not as perfect as they seemed. Rebecca never talked about it, not even to her closest friends, but over the years, small cracks had begun to form. David was always intensely private. He never changed in front of her, always waiting until she left the room or turning away. He showered alone late at night, and if she ever tried to join him, he'd gently but firmly tell her he needed space. In 20 years of marriage, Rebecca had never seen her husband fully undressed, not once. At first, she thought it was just modesty, but as the years went on, it bothered her more. And their physical relationship? It existed, but it was infrequent, mechanical, and always in the dark. Rebecca told herself it was normal. Marriages go through phases, but deep down she felt a distance she couldn't explain. There were other things, too. David refused to go to the doctor. Even when he was sick, he'd insist on treating himself at home. He never had regular checkups, never went to the dentist unless it was an emergency. When Rebecca asked why, he'd say he didn't trust doctors. And then there were the locked drawers. David kept a small cabinet in their bathroom that was always locked. When Rebecca asked what was inside, he'd say it was just personal items, medications for a condition he didn't like to talk about. She never pushed. She trusted him. He was her husband. He was a man of God. Why would he lie? But in the spring of 2018, something shifted. Rebecca began to feel like she was living with a stranger. David became more withdrawn, more secretive. He'd take phone calls in the garage. He'd stay up late on the computer, quickly closing windows when she walked in. One evening, she confided in her friend Margaret over coffee. "Sometimes I feel like I don't really know him," Rebecca said quietly. But Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that this was different. This wasn't mystery. This was secrecy. And one night, curiosity would uncover a secret no one saw coming. But Rebecca's search for the truth wouldn't just destroy her marriage. It would end a life. June 12th, 2018. Rebecca was cleaning their bedroom while David was at a church leadership retreat in Montgomery. She was vacuuming under the bed when she noticed a small cardboard box tucked far back against the wall. She pulled it out, expecting to find old books or papers. Instead, she found medical supplies, bandages, antiseptic, surgical tape, and packaging with labels she didn't recognize. Some of it looked clinical. Why would he have this? Was he sick? Was he hiding an illness from her? She put the box back, but the questions stayed with her. Over the next few days, she started noticing more. A locked case near his nightstand, strange receipts in his jacket pockets, late-night phone calls. Rebecca tried to ignore it. She prayed about it. But the feeling wouldn't go away. 2 days later, June 14th, David left for a 3-day revival trip to Mobile. As soon as his car disappeared, Rebecca made a decision. She had to know. She found a screwdriver and carefully pried open the locked case on his nightstand. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, was a prosthetic device. Medical. Anatomical. Her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. And underneath it, she found documents, medical records, prescriptions, and letters written in David's handwriting, talking about a struggle he'd carried since he was a teenager, a struggle with identity, a struggle with his body, a struggle he'd hidden from everyone, including her. Rebecca sat on the floor, papers scattered around her, and the truth crashed over her like a wave. For 20 years, David had been living a double life, and Rebecca had never known. When David came home 2 days later, Rebecca was waiting for him in the kitchen. She didn't yell, she didn't cry. She just asked him one question. "Why didn't you tell me?" David froze. His face went pale. His eyes moved to the papers on the table. He didn't deny it. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Because I was afraid you'd leave me." Rebecca stared at him. "So you lied to me for 20 years instead?" David sat down heavily, his head in his hands. "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you." "That's the same thing, David." He looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't know how to tell you who I really was. I was terrified. Every single day, I was terrified." The argument that followed was the worst fight they'd ever had. Voices were raised. Things were said that couldn't be taken back. Neighbors later told police they heard shouting around 7:30 that evening. They heard things breaking, glass shattering. The Millers had always been such a quiet couple. At some point, the argument moved to the bedroom. Rebecca felt like her entire life had been a lie, and David seemed broken, like a weight he'd carried his whole life had finally crushed him. Rebecca doesn't remember exactly how it escalated. She remembers yelling. She remembers David turning away, saying he couldn't do this anymore. She remembers feeling a rage she'd never felt before. And then she saw the knife. It was a kitchen knife, one she'd used earlier that day. She doesn't remember bringing it upstairs, but it was there, on the dresser, and in that moment, All the pain, all the anger, all the years of not knowing came crashing down. She picked it up. David turned around. Their eyes met. And then she moved. One stab, then another. David fell to the floor, gasping, his hand reaching out toward her. Blood spread quickly across his shirt. He tried to speak, but couldn't. Rebecca dropped the knife. The room went silent, except for David's labored breathing. She stood there, unable to process what she'd done. David's breathing became shallow, then stopped, and Rebecca collapsed to her knees and screamed. But what detectives would later uncover inside that bedroom left even the most seasoned officers shaken. If this part is making sense, drop a comment saying, "I'm still here." Let's see who's really watching to this point. The police arrived at 9:47 p.m. A neighbor had called 911 after hearing the screams. When officers entered the home, they found Rebecca sitting on the front porch, covered in blood, staring blankly at the street. She was rocking back and forth, her lips moving but no sound coming out. Inside, they found David Miller, 42 years old, dead in the upstairs bedroom, 2 stab wounds to the chest. Rebecca didn't resist arrest. She just kept repeating one sentence. "He lied to me." At the station, detectives tried to piece together what had happened. Rebecca was in shock, barely responsive. But as they searched the house, they began to find things: medical records, letters, the prosthetic device, documents detailing a gender identity struggle that David had hidden his entire adult life. And slowly the story began to make sense. David Miller had been born biologically female. In his early 20s, he'd begun living as a man, adopting a male identity, and eventually undergoing some medical procedures, though not complete reassignment surgery. He'd hidden this from everyone: his congregation, his friends, and most devastatingly, his wife. For 20 years he'd maintained the secret, using prosthetics, careful grooming, and an elaborate system of privacy. The medical examiner's report confirmed it, and when the media got hold of the story, it exploded. National outlets picked it up. Pastor's wife murders husband over shocking secret. The story was everywhere, and Greenville, the quiet town where everyone knew everyone, was suddenly under a microscope. People didn't know what to believe. The congregation at Grace Community Church was devastated. Some felt betrayed by David, angry that he'd lied. Others were heartbroken for him, understanding that he'd been trapped by shame and fear. Some defended David, saying he had the right to his privacy. Others were angry, saying he'd deceived his wife in the most fundamental way possible. And Rebecca? Opinion was sharply divided. Some saw her as a victim, a woman who'd been manipulated for 2 decades. They argued that discovering such a profound betrayal would break anyone. Others saw her as a murderer, someone who'd chosen violence instead of walking away. The national conversation became heated, touching on issues of gender identity, religious freedom, marriage, and violence. Interviews with neighbors and congregation members revealed complex feelings. "They seemed so happy," one neighbor said. "I never would have guessed anything was wrong." But others disagreed. "He lied to everyone," said a longtime church member. "How can you trust anything he said?" One of Rebecca's friends broke down in tears. Rebecca loved him so much, and he took that love and built it on a lie. I don't blame her for breaking. Police charged Rebecca with second-degree murder. The prosecutor argued that this was a crime of passion, but still a crime. Rebecca's public defender cited extreme emotional disturbance, but the evidence was clear. Rebecca had stabbed her husband twice. She'd killed him. The question wasn't whether she'd done it, it was why, and whether that why mattered enough to change how she'd be judged. But when the full truth of David's secret life came to light, it would change everything about how the world saw this case. 2 months into the investigation, detectives found something that changed the entire narrative. Hidden in the attic, inside a locked trunk, they discovered letters David had written over the years, letters he'd never sent, letters addressed to Rebecca, to his parents, to God. They were confessions. The earliest letter was dated 1997, a year before he'd met Rebecca. In it, David wrote about his struggle with his identity, about growing up in a strict religious household where being different meant being damned. He wrote about the shame that consumed him, about the prayers begging God to make him normal. He wrote about his decision to transition, to live as the man he felt he was inside, and about the fear that followed him every day. "I know I'm living a lie," he wrote, "but it's the only way I can live at all." In a letter dated 2000, 2 years after marrying Rebecca, David wrote about his guilt. "She doesn't know, and I can never tell her. If I tell her, I lose everything. But keeping this secret is killing me. Every day it's killing me. I look at her and I see the trust in her eyes, and I know I don't deserve it. But I can't give it up. I'm too weak." The letters continued through the years, chronicling David's internal struggle. He wrote about moments when he almost told Rebecca the truth, but fear always stopped him. In a letter from 2015, he wrote, "I thought it would get easier, but it doesn't. It gets harder, and I know one day it's going to break me, or it's going to break her." Psychological experts brought in during trial, preparation testified about the toll of living a double life. They explained how the constant stress could lead to severe anxiety and depression. One psychologist testified that David was experiencing chronic stress from belonging to a stigmatized group and having to constantly hide. He was living in constant fear, the expert explained. Every interaction was shadowed by the terror of being discovered. That kind of pressure is unsustainable. Rebecca's defense attorney built their case around the argument that Rebecca had suffered an extreme betrayal. They brought in experts who testified about the trauma of discovering such a profound deception. One expert called it identity theft of the worst kind, saying that Rebecca's entire understanding of her life had been invalidated. "Imagine learning that everything you believed about the most important relationship in your life was false," the expert said. "That would break anyone." The defense painted Rebecca as a devoted wife pushed to her breaking point. They showed photos throughout their marriage, smiling at church events, holding hands at their anniversary dinner. They wanted the jury to see what had been lost. The prosecution argued that Rebecca was controlling and unable to accept the truth. They pointed to testimony saying Rebecca didn't handle change well. "Everyone experiences betrayal," the prosecutor said. "Not everyone commits murder. Rebecca Miller had options. She could have left. She chose to take a knife and end her husband's life. That's not a psychological break. That's murder." They played audio from a neighbor's security camera. Rebecca's voice, loud and accusatory. "You made me live a lie," David's voice, quieter, pleading. "I'm sorry, please." Then shouting, something breaking. Then silence. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The courtroom was packed every day, and Greenville was forced to confront uncomfortable questions. What do you do when the person you love isn't who you thought they were? How do you reconcile faith and identity? Where does the line between victim and perpetrator lie? When the verdict was read, the courtroom gasped, but not for the reason anyone expected. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the tension was suffocating. The foreman stood and cleared his throat. In the case of the state of Alabama versus Rebecca Miller on the charge of second-degree murder, we find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom erupted, but the foreman wasn't finished. However, on the lesser-included charge of voluntary manslaughter, we find the defendant guilty. The room went silent. Guilty, but not of murder. The jury found that while Rebecca's actions were criminal, they were driven by extreme emotional disturbance. She hadn't planned it. She'd acted in a moment of profound psychological trauma. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The prosecutor asked for 20 years. The defense asked for leniency. Character witnesses testified on Rebecca's behalf. Friends talked about her kindness, her decades of service. "She's not a violent person," one said through tears. This was one moment in an otherwise exemplary life. In the end, the judge sentenced Rebecca to 12 years with the possibility of parole after 8. "This court acknowledges the extraordinary circumstances," the judge said, "but we cannot excuse the taking of a human life. This sentence reflects both the crime committed and the extreme emotional distress that precipitated it. Rebecca's final statement in court was brief. "I loved the man I thought I married," she said quietly. "I only wish he had trusted me with the truth. I wish he'd given me the chance to love him for who he really was. Maybe if he had, we'd both still have a life. I will carry this guilt for the rest of my days. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She was led away in handcuffs, and the case began to fade from the headlines. But in Greenville, the scars remained. Grace Community Church lost half its congregation. There were arguments, splits, families divided. The church closed in 2020. The building still stands today, empty, a reminder of the lives that collided there. Rebecca is currently serving her sentence at Julia Tutwiler Prison. She's eligible for parole in 2026. In interviews, she's spoken about forgiveness, both for David and for herself. "He was trying to live the only way he knew how," Rebecca said. "And I can forgive that. But understanding doesn't erase the betrayal. You can understand something and still be hurt by it." She participates in therapy groups, leads a Bible study, and works in the prison library. "I wish I'd walked away," she always says. "Every single day, I wish I'd just walked away." David's family remained mostly silent. His parents released a single statement. "We loved our child. We wish things had ended differently." They never addressed the secret publicly. This case raises questions without easy answers. Was Rebecca a victim of deception, driven to violence by a betrayal so profound it shattered her reality? Or was she a woman who let anger consume her? Can both be true? And what about David? Was he a man struggling to survive, forced to hide his true self? Or was his deception a violation of trust that destroyed the woman who stood by him? The truth is complicated. This wasn't a simple story of good and evil. It was about identity, shame, and the lies we tell. It was about what happens when love and deception become so tangled you can't separate them. Do you think Rebecca deserved prison? Or was she a victim of 20 years of deceit? Was justice really served? How would you feel if you discovered that the person you'd spent decades with had hidden something so fundamental? Would you be able to forgive? Would you be able to walk away? Or would the betrayal break something inside you that could never be repaired? Let us know your thoughts below. I read every single comment, and if you found this story as shocking as I did, subscribe so you never miss our next story. Because the truth, as painful as it is always worth knowing. And sometimes, the most unbelievable stories are the ones that really happened.